Well, today I am pleased to welcome back to the studio for the second year Joe Spinelli, who is the Senior Managing Director at Kroll in the Investigations and Dispute Practice. Joe has had a career spanning over 30 years in senior leadership positions in New York State, in the federal government, including leadership in multiple fields, including white-collar and criminal investigations, anti-bribery, corruption risk, monitorships, and forensic accounting. Joe started his career as a special agent in the FBI, where he was the case agent for AppScam. So one of these days we're going to have an exchange on sting operations.
I look forward to it.
Same here. But until then, Joe, welcome back.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk in a two-part interview about the Kroll-Ethisphere Anti-Bribery and Corruption Benchmarking Report.
Okay.
So, Joe, I'd like to start with the first section, which is called Ongoing Challenges and New Lines of Defense. So there was one element right at the start that caught my attention, where they talked about how respondents felt that their risk landscapes, and I'm quoting here, were not improving or even getting worse, with the largest source of risk being third-party exposure. So with that sort of difficult situation, only 51% of respondents felt that they had sufficient resources to support their compliance efforts. Mm-hmm. And Joe, that's down 2% from last year. So, I mean, this seems to be a situation where we have risk and challenges going up with devoted resources, even, modestly going down a little bit. Mm-hmm. So is there trouble ahead?
Well, I think it's all a matter of how it's addressed.
Okay.
And what I'm seeing is a recognition in most corporations that this is a very expensive proposition. Okay. So we got to be creative. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm seeing the formation now of internal compliance committees.
Okay.
Formulated by and populated by people who are already in the organization, mm-hmm. who have expertise in a variety of areas that's germane to compliance. So what you may have had in the past was one chief compliance officer trying to basically get his or her arms mm-hmm. around all the various problems that could exist. The risks that are involved in this have increased tremendously.
Sure.
Why? Because the government has made sure that they have articulated what the expectations are, which necessitates now you doing greater risk assessments. Who does those risk assessments mm-hmm. internally? Well, it's the chief compliance officer, but now what I'm seeing more and more are committees to assist and be part of compliance who basically populates those. Your head of internal audit, your finance department. Many times your CFO is a part of it, and they're all assisting and working together, and it's a cost-effective way of accomplishing their goals. Because, as I said previously, you get an organization that's as large as some of these Fortune 50 companies. To get your arms around compliance and do an adequate job is very, very costly. And, there's, the perception in many of the organizations has always been, well, compliance is just a cost. They're not generating any revenue. I think the message is clear now. Compliance is generating more revenue and saving more revenue than any 10 salesmen who are out there probably trying to sell the products. Why? Because they're precluding the type of fines, draconic fines, that the government will impose upon you if, in fact, you're not compliant. So it's a team effort. It's the cost-effective way of doing business right now, and ensuring that you have the type of effective compliance programs that's needed.
So that 51% that feels that they're not getting the support that they need. So you see them reaching out internally to say, look, we've got to have some shared functionality here. We've got to have some teamwork in mm-hmm. order to address this issue across the organization.
I think that 51% will go up substantially when, in fact, they recognize that there's a better way, in teaming to try and get this done, and do it in an incisive manner. I think, the more people you have with the right expertise to assist the chief compliance officer, the easier and more cost-effective compliance is going to be to really get it to where you want it to be in your organization.
Sure. Well, what about the sort of the third-party exposure? I mean, do you see that sort of shared functionality and how organizations are sort of reaching across to their peers in other parts of the organization to say this is also something where the business shares the risk?
I think it starts with the board. I'm seeing the board and the C-suite people now directly involved, not just in overseeing the risk of third parties, but getting involved directly in the training of employees and third parties, ensuring that they are compliant, that they're signing their certifications, that they attend training. And then the oversight that I'm seeing exhibited over the actual process itself from when the business sponsor first issues the questionnaire. The board is taking a much more active role, and I'm seeing more and more third parties disqualified because of it. Why? Because the reputational damage is so great,
Right.
and they don't want that to basically in any way damage their organization. And they don't want to expose themselves to it themselves because they have a direct fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders that they're supposed to be overseeing risk and ensuring that they put internal controls to enjoin it. And I think that's really at the heart of where you're going to see more and more corporations have a team approach to enjoining potential problems.
Isn't it interesting that as sophisticated as the function has become and as evolved as the field has become, most third parties are still the Achilles heel of an entire program?
Well, third parties will always be the Achilles heel as long as the organizations are not doing the type of due diligence and have the comprehensive risk assessment of those third parties from the inception. What I mean by that is, are you risk ranking your third parties?
Right.
Are you putting them in categories like high, medium, and low? Where they fall into a high category, are you doing enhanced due diligence? Are you ensuring that you could illustrate to the government that you've covered every base possible?
Sure.
Look, you can do all of the aforementioned, and you can still have a rogue third party that could jeopardize your organization. Nobody can deny that, but I think the government is very sensitive to that fact. And if you can illustrate to them you've made that good faith effort proactively, I think that they'll mitigate any potential fines and exposure you might have because of that one or two third parties that got you into trouble. So, my point is, you have to be able to illustrate to the government that you've really made a concentrated effort. And when I say enhanced due diligence, I'm talking specifically about having the right individuals in the jurisdictions where that third party is going to be doing business to basically conduct the investigations necessary. Experienced people who speak the language, understand the culture, know where and how legally and professionally to get the information necessary to draw and make an intelligent decision. Do we want to do business with this individual?
Joe, do you see corporations as still trying to get away with due diligence light to say, we did it, we're covered, we've got that binder if there's ever an issue?
I do, unfortunately, and it's a shame because there are enough tools out there that are at their disposal that if they utilize them, for instance, Kroll has a wonderful portal that we basically assist our clients with, and there's no more cost-effective way to be able to risk rank your third parties and get you into a position where you can illustrate to the government not only that you did due diligence on the high-risk people, but you've done due diligence on your entire population that way. And there's no more cost-effective way of doing it. And I think if corporations would just understand that they can't do it manually, and they can't do it, as you put it, due diligence light, and expect the government to respect that. If they do it the proper way from the inception, they'll save a lot more money, believe me. And there's no better way to be able to illustrate to whether it's the government or even more importantly to your own people and employees internally that you've made the effort. Because look, employees, the vast majority of employees want to be associated with an organization that they know is reputable, compliant, and is not going to be on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow in some negative way.
Well, before we return to the Kroll-Ethisphere report, just another paper that gets a lot of attention is the DOJ's evaluation of corporate compliance programs. And I found that one of the most fascinating parts of that document was the third-party section, where the government said if there's an issue, not only are we going to want to look at how you incentivize your internal team, we want to know how you incentivized your third parties and how it is that you evaluated what it is they said they were going to be doing.
Well, I mean, that all falls under, two I think, facets of your due diligence. One, from the inception, what kind of contractual arrangement did you have with that
Right.
third party? Do you have the right to audit? Are you exercising that right where you think it's necessary? Who's conducting it? Now I'm seeing internal audit, professionals directly involved in doing that in compliance and in conjunction with compliance doing their own audits on policies and procedures. That's all part of the story. I mean, that's all necessary. And I think, it's not enough for you to say third parties are, basically compliant because they told us they were.
Right.
They better be able to certify that they have read and understood the compliance program. You better be able to give evidence that they attended the training. You also, what I've seen now are third parties taking case studies that are required as part of the training program, which basically really puts them in a position to say unequivocally they understand what compliance is all about and what the expectations are of the organization and what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And I think that's all part of, whether or not you can illustrate in good faith that you've made the efforts necessary.
Because this is a situation where what you don't know is usually what's going to hurt you, isn't it?
It will kill you, no question about it. Absolutely.
So one bright spot on the report, and you've talked a little bit about this, is the report talked about a growing trend in the CFO and how the CFO and the finance department are getting engaged on anti-bribery compliance. So what do you see as the major causes for that trend? And Joe, the report, when it speaks of the finance department, is it talking about internal audit as well?
Yes, and I think internal audits, the directors of internal audit, I see, have a greater role in compliance each and every day.
Okay.
Who is in a better position, think about this, Richard, to examine transactions and take a look at expenditures and understand expenses of individuals and third parties, to examine the salaries that are being paid and the monies that are being paid to third parties. Is it justified? Is it reasonable? And also I see them, becoming very, very well versed in the terminology of FCPA itself.
Right.
They understand what is anything of value. What is a foreign official? What are the red flags that can get my organization in trouble? They're well versed because they're also attending the same training as everyone else, and they're in the best position of anyone to, from a books and records standpoint, especially as one of the major components of the FCPA, to ensure their house is in order, that they have the right internal controls and all the right accounting internal controls, and that they're continuously examining the transactions between third parties and who they're doing business with.
So for a multinational that has global operations, some in some far-flung places in the world, maybe remotely supervised, where an organization might not have the resources to have an embedded compliance leader in some of these locales, do you see that maybe the local finance function that might be there can sort of be the eyes and ears of a compliance program?
It has to be. When it's decentralized like that, it's incumbent upon the CFO to ensure that he has individuals that, for lack of a better term, he's deputized to do the very thing you just described, continuously looking at all the various expenditures, expenses, the monies that are going out, who's authorized to make those types of expenditures, and the third-party payments. I mean, that in itself, where are those payments going to? I mean, they have to understand and be cognizant of the red flags that could get them into trouble.
You're right. It's one thing to try to think corruptly, engage in corruption. You still have to get the money out, right?
Absolutely. But it's how you do it. And it's also having the proper controls around the actual expenditure to ensure that it's not going to the wrong people. not going to the wrong charity, not going to the wrong political
Sure.
party, not going, to places that it shouldn't go. And look, if you're sending it to Russia and or the Isle of Man or places like that,
Right.
or why is that money going there? I mean, it's, a lot of times, believe it or not, in decentralized, locations, the locals who are doing business there, they're not well versed.
Right.
They're not very well versed in FCPA or anti-bribery and corruption. But that's also a component of getting an effective training
Right.
program in place to ensure that everyone who is working for that organization and is going to be in any way, shape, or form touching money or having responsibilities related to money and payments to third parties especially, that they're very well versed in what the expectations are and what can get them into trouble.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to having you
My
back.
pleasure.
And we'll talk about interval monitoring next.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Sure.